There are circumstances where the latitude of a scene is way too great for the capabilities of your camera. And there's just no way around it. And if you don't have lighting to try and equalize that shadow to the highlight, and you can't get it within the latitude of your camera, there is one other option, and that's HDR. Now with HDR, I know most people think of HDR as this really wacky version of photography that looks like a painting. That is not what I like to do. I use HDR in as subtle a way as possible so that I can expand the latitude of my camera but keep it real. I do not want my photograph to look like a painting, and I don't think you do either. So we are photographers, and I'm going to show you how to use HDR like a photographer. So when you're making your HDR image, there are certain things you can do to make yourself a much more successful HDR photographer. The first thing is use a tripod if you can, because tripods will help to steady that camera. Also, use a shutter release cable because that will help to make sure that you're not shaking the camera while you're actually pushing the button. Next, make sure that you put your camera in that high-speed burst mode so that when you start firing your HDRs, they all happen in rapid succession so that whatever's in front of the camera also doesn't have much of a chance to move. And the last thing that you'll need to find on your camera is the bracketing option. Now every camera is going to be a little bit different, but the first thing you have to ask is how wide an exposure do I actually need on an HDR image? And in order to figure that out, I'm going to spot meter the deepest shadow in the photograph and also the brightest highlight in the photograph. And if I look at those two exposure readings, that's going to tell me how much latitude I actually need. Then I simply set the number of exposures and the width between them, whether it's a stop or a stop and a half, based on how wide that exposure was. And of course, in the end, as with any image that you take when you're on location, the most important thing you can do after the shot is taken is to review that histogram and make sure that you have the proper data. Now, in the case of an HDR, you're always going to be reviewing every single one of those exposures to make sure that you have the right amount of information so that when you get back to Lightroom, you'll have all the data and you can create a successful HDR with the most information possible. In our next video, we're going to take those images that were correctly exposed that we pre-visualized on location and also in the studio, and I'm going to show you how powerful a concept it is to have a correctly exposed image inside of post-production, because that's where we can really make the perfect image, no matter what the circumstance was when we were photographing. And don't forget to RSVP for the upcoming webinar where we're going to take those perfectly exposed and adjusted images and show you how to add style with just the click of a button by using and organizing your perfectly designed presets. And when I say presets, you only think you know what I'm talking about. See you there.